The morning sky over the Atlantic Ocean turned dark without warning. It was not a storm or an eclipse. Something far worse had arrived. 300 massive warships emerged from the emptiness of space and positioned themselves between Earth and the Sun. Each vessel was larger than any city on the planet below. Their hulls were black as coal and covered with weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Daniel Cooper was sitting in his small apartment in Washington, D.C. when his phone rang. He had been enjoying a quiet breakfast of eggs and toast, reading the morning news on his tablet. The caller was his supervisor at the State Department. Her voice was shaking as she spoke only 3 words before hanging up. "Get here now." Within 2 hours, Daniel found himself standing in the Great Hall of the United Nations building in New York City. Representatives from every nation on Earth had gathered in panic and confusion. Military officers whispered in corners. Scientists stared at their phones with wide eyes. Nobody knew what to do, because nothing like this had ever happened before. The first transmission came at exactly noon. Every screen on the planet, from the largest billboard in Times Square to the smallest phone in a farmer's pocket, displayed the same image. A creature appeared that no human had ever seen. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales covering its entire body like armor made of black glass. Its eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and when it opened its mouth to speak, rows of sharp teeth gleamed in the light. The creature called itself High Commander Zorath of the Velthari Empire. His voice was deep and cold, translated into every human language simultaneously by technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was understood. The Velthari Empire had conquered 17 star systems. They had defeated species far more advanced than humans. They had never lost a war, and they had never shown mercy to those who resisted. Earth had been chosen as their next territory. Humans would surrender all natural resources, all technology, and all freedom. They would become servants of the Empire, working in mines and factories for the benefit of their new masters. Zorath gave humanity 72 hours to accept these terms. If they refused, or if they tried to fight, every city on the planet would be reduced to ash. To prove he was not making empty threats, Zorath ordered a demonstration. A beam of white light shot down from the flagship and struck a small, uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. The island was 3 miles wide and covered with palm trees and white sand beaches. In less than 5 seconds, it simply ceased to exist. The ocean rushed in to fill the hole where it had been, creating waves that reached shores hundreds of miles away. The world watched in horror. Some people screamed. Some people cried. Some people dropped to their knees and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. In the United Nations building, silence fell over the assembled leaders like a heavy blanket. Daniel Cooper did not scream or cry or pray. He watched the alien commander's face very carefully, studying every movement and expression. Daniel had spent 20 years as a diplomat, negotiating with the most difficult people on Earth. He had learned to read faces the way other people read books. And he saw something in Zorath's eyes that gave him a tiny spark of hope. The alien was not just confident. He was arrogant. He believed so completely in his own power that he could not imagine any other outcome. Daniel had seen that look before in human leaders. And he knew that arrogance was always a weakness waiting to be exploited. Admiral Kevin Price arrived at the United Nations by helicopter an hour after the transmission ended. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had commanded naval forces for 30 years and had prepared for threats that most people could not imagine. Now, the threat he had feared most had finally arrived. Kevin walked straight to Daniel and pulled him aside. They had known each other for years and trusted each other completely. The Admiral spoke in a low voice that only Daniel could hear. For 3 decades, Earth had been preparing in secret. Radio telescopes had detected signals from alien civilizations long before the Velthari arrived. Scientists had known that humans were not alone in the universe. Military planners had assumed that first contact might not be friendly. While the public lived their normal lives, governments had quietly built defenses hidden in places no one would think to look. Weapons platforms rested on the ocean floor beneath miles of water. Missile systems waited inside mountains that appeared empty from the outside. A fleet of combat spacecraft had been constructed on the far side of the moon. Invisible to anyone looking from Earth, none of it had ever been tested in real combat. But it existed, and it was ready. Daniel understood immediately what Kevin was asking him to do. He needed time. Every hour of delay was another hour for human forces to prepare and position themselves. The diplomat nodded slowly and returned to the main hall. Meanwhile, Dr. Laura Mitchell worked frantically in a laboratory deep beneath the Pentagon. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist, who studied the possibility of alien life. For years, her colleagues had laughed at her work, calling it science fiction. Nobody was laughing now. Laura watched recordings of Zorath's transmission over and over again, examining every frame. She noticed that the alien commander flinched slightly whenever one of his officers made a sudden movement behind him. His yellow eyes tracked motion with the focus of a predator, but there was fear hidden beneath the aggression. She began to develop a theory. The Velthari were hunters by nature, evolved from creatures that ambushed their prey. They were strong and fast and deadly, but they feared the unexpected. They conquered by overwhelming force and intimidation because they preferred enemies who surrendered without fighting. A species that fought back unpredictably would terrify them on a deep, instinctive level. Laura sent her findings to Admiral Price within hours. The Admiral read her report and smiled for the first time since the invasion began. The first day ended with humanity appearing to submit. Television broadcasts showed people weeping in the streets. Politicians gave speeches about the need for calm acceptance. Religious leaders urged their followers to prepare for a new chapter in human history, but beneath the surface, something very different was happening. Soldiers moved through underground tunnels to reach hidden bases. Engineers powered up systems that had waited years for this moment. Pilots climbed into cockpits of spacecraft they had trained to fly in simulators. Zorath watched the human broadcasts from his command chamber and felt satisfied. These creatures were weak and cowardly, just as he had expected. The conquest would be easy, and his reputation would grow even greater. He did not notice the small details that might have warned him. He did not see the determination in the eyes of the humans who pretended to cry. He did not realize that their despair was a performance. The clock continued to count down. 72 hours was not very long, but for humanity, it would be enough. 40-8 hours remained on the countdown when Daniel Cooper requested his first meeting with High Commander Zorath. The alien agreed, appearing on screen from his flagship with obvious amusement. He enjoyed watching inferior species grovel before him. Daniel spoke slowly and carefully, explaining that Earth had many different nations with many different leaders. Gathering them all together to agree on surrender terms was a complicated process. There were ceremonies and traditions that needed to be followed. Some leaders were old and moved slowly. Others were far away and needed time to travel. Could the great and powerful Velthari Empire perhaps extend the deadline by just a few more days? Zorath laughed at the request. His laughter sounded like rocks grinding together. He told Daniel that he had heard similar excuses from other species before their destruction, but the alien was in no hurry. His fleet needed no resupply, and his soldiers were well rested. He would grant an additional 24 hours, but not a moment more. Daniel thanked him with exaggerated gratitude and ended the transmission. As soon as the screen went dark, he turned to Admiral Price with a grim smile. They had bought humanity one more day. Behind the moon, Captain Chris Bennett stood on the bridge of the spacecraft Resolute. He was a lean man in his 40s with calm brown eyes and steady hands. He had been selected to command the hidden fleet because he never panicked and never made hasty decisions. 41 ships waited around him, their crews ready but nervous. Lieutenant Amy Shaw worked at the weapons console nearby. She was young, barely 30, but she knew more about combat systems than anyone else in the fleet. She had designed some of the weapons herself, spending years perfecting missiles and energy projectors that had never been fired in real battle. Today, she would finally learn if her work had been good enough. Chris gathered his captains through a secure communication channel. He explained the plan in simple terms. The Velthari had positioned their fleet for maximum intimidation, spreading their ships in a wide formation to cast shadows over as much of Earth as possible. This looked impressive, but it was terrible tactics. Their vessels were too far apart to support each other in combat. Human ships were smaller and faster. They would emerge from behind the moon at maximum speed, diving into the gaps between enemy vessels. Each human ship had specific targets assigned. They would strike engine and weapons, crippling the enemy rather than trying to destroy ships outright. A disabled ship was actually better than a destroyed one because it would distract other enemy vessels trying to rescue their comrades. On Earth, General Tony Martinez coordinated ground defenses from a bunker 2 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was a stocky man with a thick mustache and a voice that could be heard across any battlefield. His screens showed the position of every military unit on the planet. From infantry soldiers to hidden artillery batteries, Commander Megan Torres handled European defenses from a similar bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. She was precise and methodical, checking every detail 3 times before considering it complete. Her forces were positioned around major cities, ready to protect civilians when the fighting started. The evacuation of cities had begun quietly on the first day. Officials told people that temporary shelters were being prepared in case of natural disasters. Subway stations were expanded. Old mines were converted into living spaces. Millions of people moved underground without understanding the true reason why. On the second day, Zorath made a decision that would prove to be his greatest mistake. He wanted to humiliate the humans before the final surrender. He would send his personal guard, the 50 finest warriors in his fleet, down to the surface to execute the human delegation in front of the whole world. It would show the galaxy what happened to species that wasted Velthari time. His officers advised against dividing their forces, but Zorath silenced them with a glare. He had never lost a soldier in ground combat. His warriors were faster, stronger, and better armed than any enemy they had faced. 50 of them could defeat an entire human army. Admiral Price received intelligence about the landing party within minutes. Velthari communication systems were good, but human hackers had been probing them since the invasion began. A young programmer named Sam Griffin had found a way to intercept their signals without being detected. He sat in a basement office, surrounded by computer screens. Reading enemy messages in real time, Sam was barely 25 years old, with messy hair and tired eyes. He had not slept since the invasion began, surviving on coffee and determination. His skills had been developed playing games and exploring the internet, but now they served a much greater purpose. Every piece of information he gathered was sent directly to military commanders. The plan changed to account this new opportunity. If Zorath's elite warriors could be defeated on Earth, it would shatter the myth of Velthari invincibility. Admiral Price contacted Agent Nick Palmer, who commanded a special unit trained specifically for combat against non-human opponents. Nick was a serious man who rarely smiled. He had spent his career preparing for a threat that most people believed was imaginary. His soldiers wore advanced combat suits that enhanced their strength and speed. They had studied theoretical alien biology and practiced fighting in environments that simulated extraterrestrial conditions. Now, their training would be tested for real. The team assembled in New York City. Moving through tunnels that connected to the subway system, Lisa Chen, their best marksman, positioned sniper teams on rooftops around Central Park, where intelligence suggested the Velthari would land. She had eyes like a hawk and nerves of pure ice. Her job was to find weak points in alien armor that no one had ever examined up close. Zorath announced the execution publicly, broadcasting the time and location to ensure maximum viewership. He wanted every human on the planet to watch their leaders die. He believed this would crush any remaining spirit of resistance. Instead, it told humanity exactly where and when to strike. The hours ticked away. Television cameras were set up in Central Park, operated by journalists who believed they were documenting a tragedy. Underground soldiers checked their weapons one final time. In space, engines warmed up silently. Daniel Cooper continued to play his role perfectly. He appeared on Velthari screens looking exhausted and defeated, thanking Zorath for his patience and promising that surrender documents were almost ready. The alien commander enjoyed watching him squirm. Dr. Laura Mitchell finished her analysis, and distributed it to every military unit. She had identified 7 weak points in Velthari physiology: the joints between armor plates, the eyes, the base of the neck, and several vulnerable spots that human anatomy did not share. Her report included diagrams that showed exactly where to aim. The night before the scheduled execution, Earth fell quiet. Cities that normally buzzed with activity were still and dark. To Zoroth, watching from orbit, it looked like a world that had given up hope. He could not have been more wrong. Every human on the planet was holding their breath, waiting for the signal to fight back. The sun rose on the final day, and the Velthari landing craft began its descent toward Central Park. 50 alien warriors sharpened their ceremonial blades, eager to taste human blood. They had no idea that they were falling into a trap that would change the history of the galaxy. The Velthari landing craft touched down on the green grass of Central Park at exactly 7 in the morning. Steam rose from the ground where the hot engines had scorched the earth. The ramp lowered slowly, and 50 alien warriors marched out in perfect formation. They were terrifying to behold. Each one stood over 7 feet tall, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their armor was decorated with symbols that represented enemies they had killed. Some had killed hundreds. They carried curved blades that could cut through steel and energy weapons that could vaporize a human in seconds. The leader of the group was named Krath. He was Zoroth's most trusted warrior, a creature who had personally executed the leaders of 3 different species. He looked around Central Park with his yellow eyes and saw nothing but empty pathways and silent trees. The human delegation was supposed to be waiting. The cameras were supposed to be rolling. But the park was completely deserted. Krath spoke into his communicator, reporting the strange situation to the flagship. Zoroth responded with irritation, ordering him to proceed to the designated meeting point. The humans were probably hiding somewhere nearby, too frightened to show themselves. The 50 warriors began walking north through the park. Their boots crushed the gravel beneath them. Birds flew away from the trees as they approached. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass. Agent Nick Palmer watched them from a command post beneath Grand Central Station. His screen showed video feeds from dozens of hidden cameras. He could see every move the aliens made. Beside him, his team leaders waited for orders, their fingers hovering over communication devices. Nick waited until the Velthari reached the exact center of the park. Then he gave the signal. Lisa Chen fired the first shot from a rooftop 3 blocks away. Her rifle was designed to punch through armored vehicles. She aimed at the joint between Krath's shoulder plate and his chest armor, exactly where Dr. Mitchell's report had indicated a weak point. The bullet traveled faster than the speed of sound. Krath stumbled, but did not fall. Green blood sprayed from the wound. He roared in shock and anger, spinning around to find the source of the attack. Before he could locate it, 5 more shots hit 5 more warriors. 2 of them dropped to the ground. The Velthari had never experienced an ambush like this. They were the ambushers, not the ambushed. For a precious few seconds, they froze in confusion. Their training had not prepared them for being the prey. Nick Palmer's soldiers emerged from manholes and basement doors surrounding the park. They moved in teams of 4, using trees and statues for cover. Their combat suits made them faster than normal humans. It's fast enough to keep pace with alien reflexes. The battle that followed was unlike anything either species had experienced. The Velthari were stronger and more durable. But they fought according to ancient patterns that humans had studied and predicted. They expected enemies to stand in formation and trade blows. Instead, humans scattered like leaves in the wind, attacking from every direction at once. Buildings collapsed as demolition charges detonated, blocking escape routes. Water mains burst and flooded the streets, making the ground slippery under alien feet. Smoke grenades filled the air with thick clouds that the Velthari heat vision could not penetrate. Every human trick from thousands of years of warfare was deployed in those 11 minutes. Krath killed 7 human soldiers before a grenade exploded beneath his feet. He was still alive when they captured him, dragging him into a subway tunnel that led to a secure holding facility. Only 12 Velthari warriors were taken alive. The rest lay scattered across the ruined park, their black blood mixing with the morning dew. In orbit, High Commander Zoroth watched the disaster unfold through cameras attached to his warriors. For the first time in his long life, he felt genuine fear. These humans were not cattle waiting for slaughter. They were something far more dangerous. He had no time to process this realization. Alarms began screaming throughout his flagship. The human fleet had emerged from behind the moon. Captain Chris Bennett led the attack from the Resolute. His ship dove between two Velthary cruisers, firing missiles at their engine sections. The enemy vessels were so far apart that neither could help the other. By the time they turned their weapons toward the Resolute, the human ship had already moved on to the next target. Lieutenant Amy Shaw coordinated the weapons fire across the entire fleet. Her voice remained calm even as explosions lit up the darkness of space. She had named each of her missiles after people she loved. The one that destroyed the flagship's main cannon was called Patricia. After her grandmother, the Velthary fleet had never faced enemies who moved like this. Human pilots weaved between enemy ships, making themselves impossible to target without risking friendly fire. They attacked in patterns that seemed random but were carefully choreographed. Every weakness that human analysts had predicted was exploited without mercy. Admiral Price watched the battle from a command center on Earth, receiving reports from every sector. He saw enemy ships losing power and drifting helplessly. He saw others trying to regroup into defensive formations, only to be scattered by fresh waves of human attacks. The invincible Velthary fleet was being torn apart piece by piece. Zorath screamed orders at his captains. But coordination was impossible. Sam Griffin and his team of hackers had infiltrated their communication network. Messages were delayed, scrambled, or simply deleted. The Velthary commanders could not speak to each other reliably, and in the chaos of battle, this was a death sentence. 3 hours after the first shot was fired in Central Park, the battle was effectively over. Of 300 Velthary warships, fewer than 80 remained capable of fighting. Human losses were surprisingly light. 23 ships had been destroyed, and perhaps 1,000 soldiers had died on the ground. It was a tragedy, but it was also a victory beyond anyone's hopes. Zorath sat alone in his command chamber, surrounded by the sounds of damage, alarms, and dying systems. His flagship was crippled, unable to move or fight. Through the viewport, he could see human ships circling like sharks around wounded prey. He had come to conquer a primitive world and add another trophy to his collection. Instead, he had awakened something that his empire had never encountered. A species that did not surrender. A species that did not break. A species that became more dangerous when threatened, rather than less. For the first time in Velthary history, a high commander considered the possibility of defeat. The cold emptiness of space pressed against the damaged hull of his flagship, and Zorath understood that everything was about to change. Not just for him, but for his entire civilization. The humans had proven something important today, and the galaxy would never forget it. High Commander Zoroth paced back and forth in his damaged command chamber. The lights flickered with every step he took. Half of his consoles were dark, and the ones that still worked showed nothing but bad news. His magnificent fleet had been reduced to a scattered collection of wounded vessels. Drifting in orbit around a planet that was supposed to be easy prey, he tried again to contact his homeworld. The communication array had been repaired enough to send a signal across the stars. He composed a message requesting immediate reinforcements, describing the unexpected resistance and the losses his fleet had suffered. He promised that with fresh ships, he would still deliver Earth to the Empire. The message vanished into space. Zorath waited for a response. Hours passed, but nothing came. He sent the message again, with increasing desperation. Still nothing. He did not know that every transmission he sent was being captured by Sam Griffin before it ever left the solar system. Sam sat in his basement office, watching lines of alien code scroll across his screens. He had learned enough of the Velthary language to understand the basics. Zorath was begging for help, and Sam was making sure that help would never come. The young programmer allowed himself a small smile before returning to his work. On Earth, the captured Velthary warriors were being held in a secure facility beneath the Nevada desert. Dr. Lara? Mitchell supervised their treatment, ensuring they received medical care and food despite their status as enemies. She believed that mercy was not just morally correct but strategically valuable. The prisoners were confused by this treatment. In their culture, captured enemies were tortured for information and then executed for entertainment. They expected the same fate and were prepared to die with honor. Instead, they were given clean rooms, decent meals, and access to doctors who treated their wounds. Laura spent hours talking to them through translation devices. She learned about the Velthri Empire, its structure, its history, and its weaknesses. Most importantly, she learned that Zoroth had acted without full approval from the High Council. His invasion was supposed to be a quick victory that would boost his political standing at home. The embarrassing defeat he had suffered would make him a target for his rivals. She brought this information to Admiral Price and Daniel Cooper. The three of them met in a conference room deep beneath the Pentagon, surrounded by maps and screens showing the current situation. The enemy fleet was crippled, but not destroyed. Human forces controlled the space around Earth, but did not have the capability to chase fleeing enemies across the galaxy. Admiral Price wanted to finish the fight. He argued that they should destroy every remaining Velthri ship and capture or kill Zorath. Leaving any survivors would allow the Empire to learn from their mistakes and return with a more effective force. Daniel disagreed. He saw an opportunity that went beyond simple military victory. If they could turn Zorath from an enemy into a message, they might prevent future invasions entirely. The diplomat proposed a bold plan that would require careful coordination between military force and political theater. Laura supported Daniel's approach. She explained that the Velthri respected strength, but also understood negotiation. They had conquered many species, but they had also made treaties with those strong enough to demand respect. If humanity demonstrated both the ability to destroy and the wisdom to restrain, they might earn a place among the powers of the galaxy. The decision went to the highest levels of human government. Leaders from every nation participated in a secure conference call that lasted 6 hours. There were arguments and disagreements, but in the end, they reached consensus. Humanity would follow Daniel's plan. Captain Chris Bennett received new orders aboard the Resolute. He was to approach the Velthri flagship and offer terms for negotiation. Zoroth would be invited aboard the human vessel as a guest, not a prisoner. He would be treated with respect appropriate to his rank, and he would be made to understand that his survival depended entirely on human generosity. The approach was tense. Lieutenant Amy Shaw kept weapons locked on the enemy flagship the entire time, ready to fire at any sign of treachery. But the Velthri did not resist. They had seen what human weapons could do, and they had no desire to experience it again. Zoroth was brought aboard the Resolute in a shuttle that seemed tiny compared to his own. Human soldiers surrounded him, their faces hidden behind dark visors. They did not speak to him or touch him. They simply guided him through corridors that seemed too small for his massive body until he reached the conference room, where his fate would be decided. Meanwhile, General Martinez secured the last pockets of resistance on Earth. A few Velthri soldiers had scattered during the battle and were hiding in remote areas, afraid to fight and unable to escape. Human forces found them one by one, offering them the same choice: surrender peacefully or face destruction. Most chose to surrender. Commander Torres coordinated with defense forces across Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. She was amazed at how smoothly the operation had gone. Nations that had been rivals for centuries had worked together without hesitation. Language barriers and political differences had been set aside in the face of a common threat. For one brief moment, humanity had truly been united. The world emerged from underground shelters to find their cities intact and their skies clear. News spread quickly through television and internet. The invasion had been defeated. The aliens had been beaten. People celebrated in the streets, crying and laughing and holding each other, but the leaders knew that the work was not finished. Defeating one fleet did not mean safety. The Velthri Empire controlled 17 star systems and could send more ships. Other alien civilizations might see Earth as a target now that its existence was known. Humanity needed to establish its place in the galaxy, and that required more than military victory. Daniel Cooper prepared for the most important negotiation of human history. He reviewed everything Laura had learned about Velthari culture. He studied their body language, their customs, their concepts of honor and shame. He would face Zoroth not as a defeated diplomat begging for mercy, but as the representative of a species that had earned the right to be treated as equals. The message to the Velthari homeworld was crafted carefully. It would be sent from Earth after the negotiation was complete, delivered through channels that Zoroth's rivals could not ignore. It would tell the truth about what had happened here, but it would also offer something unexpected: a chance for peace, a chance for trade, a chance for a new relationship between species. Sam Griffin prepared to release the transmission blocks. When the time was right, the Velthari High Council would learn everything. Their fleet had been destroyed, their commander had been humiliated, and the primitive species they had tried to enslave was offering them a way forward that did not involve more blood. The stage was set for the final act. Zoroth sat in a human conference room, stripped of his weapons and his pride, surrounded by the species he had tried to conquer. In a few hours, he would learn what mercy really meant, and why it was sometimes more powerful than cruelty. High Commander Zoroth stood in the conference room of the Resolute, trying to maintain his dignity despite everything that had happened. His ceremonial armor had been removed. His weapons were gone. He wore simple clothes provided by his captors, garments that felt strange against his scaled skin. Through the large window behind the human delegates, he could see the burning wreckage of his once mighty fleet. Ambassador Daniel Cooper sat across the table from him, flanked by Admiral Kevin Price and Dr. Laura Mitchell. Representatives from every major nation on Earth filled the remaining seats. They watched Zoroth with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed anger. Many of them had lost friends and family in the brief war. They had every reason to want revenge. Daniel spoke first. His voice was calm and measured, showing no trace of the fear he had pretended to feel during their earlier conversations. He explained that humanity had no interest in conquest or empire. They did not want to destroy the Velthari or take their worlds. They wanted only to be left alone to live in peace, and to be treated with respect by other species in the galaxy. Zoroth listened in silence. He had expected demands, threats, and humiliation. He had prepared himself for torture and eventual execution. This offer of peace was so unexpected that he did not know how to respond. Admiral Price spoke next. His words were harder than Daniel's. He described what would happen if the Velthari Empire sent another fleet to Earth. Human weapons had been tested and proven effective. Human soldiers had shown they could defeat Velthari warriors in direct combat. Any future invasion would end the same way, except that humanity would not be merciful a second time. The Admiral was not making empty threats. During the past few days, human scientists had studied, captured Velthari technology, and found ways to improve their own weapons. Given time, Earth would become even more dangerous. The cost of another war would be measured in millions of Velthari lives. Laura Mitchell offered a different perspective. She spoke about the prisoners being held on Earth, about how they were being treated fairly despite being enemies. She described conversations she had with Velthari warriors, who were beginning to question everything they had been taught about inferior species. These prisoners would eventually be returned to their people. Carrying stories of human mercy, Zoroth finally found his voice. He asked why humans would show mercy to enemies who had tried to enslave them. It made no sense according to everything he knew about the universe. The strong dominated the weak. The victors took what they wanted from the defeated. That was the natural order of things. Daniel smiled at the question. He explained that humans had learned a different lesson from their long and violent history. They had fought countless wars among themselves, killing each other in numbers that would horrify most species. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world multiple times over. And through all of that bloodshed, they had learned that war was rarely worth the cost. Peace allowed civilizations to grow. Trade made everyone richer. Cooperation solved problems that conflict only made worse. Humans had not become soft or weak by choosing peace whenever possible. They had become stronger by building instead of destroying. The Velthari Empire might be powerful today, but how much more powerful could it have been if it had traded with other species instead of conquering them? The argument struck Zoroth in ways he did not expect. He thought about his own civilization, about the resources spent maintaining armies and fleets, about the rebellions that constantly needed to be suppressed, about the fear that kept conquered species in line, but also prevented them from contributing their full potential. What if there was another way? Daniel presented the formal terms. Humanity would release all prisoners and return them safely to Velthari space. Zoroth would be allowed to return as well, though his reputation would obviously suffer. In exchange, the Velthari Empire would recognize Earth as a sovereign world, not subject to conquest or interference. Trade relations would be established between the two civilizations. Diplomatic channels would be opened. There was one final condition. The message to the Velthari High Council would be sent by human hands, not through Zoroth's damaged communications. It would tell the complete truth about what had happened, including the mistakes Zoroth had made and the defeats he had suffered. His political rivals would certainly use this information against him, but the message would also include humanity's offer of peace, which the Council would have to consider publicly. Zoroth understood that he was being given a choice between personal disgrace and continued war. If he refused these terms, humans would eventually destroy his remaining ships and kill him. His fleet would become a cautionary tale about underestimating unknown enemies. But if he accepted, he might survive. He might even find a way to rebuild his reputation by becoming an advocate for the new relationship between species. He accepted. The message was transmitted to the Velthari homeworld within the hour. Sam Griffin released the communication blocks at exactly the right moment, ensuring that every important figure in the Empire received the news simultaneously. There could be no cover-up, no spin, no denial. The truth would spread across 17 star systems before the day was over. The Velthari High Council convened an emergency session. They watched recordings of the battle, listened to Zoroth's captured transmissions, and read the human peace proposal. Some wanted to send an overwhelming force to avenge the defeat. Others recognized that such an action would be incredibly costly and might not succeed. The debate lasted for weeks. In the end, they chose peace. Not out of respect for humanity, but out of practical calculation. The Empire had many enemies, and a prolonged war against a difficult target would weaken them against other threats. Better to accept the human offer and focus resources elsewhere. There would be time for revenge later if it proved necessary, but something unexpected happened in the years that followed. Trade between Earth and Velthari space proved beneficial to both sides. Human creativity and adaptability produced technologies that the Empire found valuable. Velthari resources and manufacturing capabilities helped humanity expand beyond their single world. The relationship that began with hostility slowly transformed into something resembling genuine partnership. Dr. Laura Mitchell became Earth's first interstellar ambassador, traveling to dozens of alien worlds and establishing relationships that had seemed impossible during the invasion. Captain Chris Bennett and Lieutenant Amy Shaw received the highest honors their species could offer, then returned to their ships to guard the space around Earth. Agent Nick Palmer and Lisa Chen trained a new generation of soldiers, prepared to face any threat. Sam Griffin was recruited to build humanity's galactic communication network, turning his hacking skills into tools for peaceful cooperation. General Martinez and Commander Torres helped create a unified planetary defense force that answered to all of humanity, not individual nations. And Daniel Cooper finally returned to his Washington apartment. He found his breakfast still sitting on the table where he had left it weeks earlier, cold and stale but somehow comforting. He threw it away and made himself a fresh meal, eating slowly while watching the sunset through his window above the Earth. Human and Velthari ships now flew side by side, watching the stars together. Other species had taken notice of what happened in this small corner of the galaxy. Some saw humanity as a threat to be avoided. Others saw potential allies. A few saw hope that the cycles of conquest and subjugation might someday end. Zoroth returned to his homeworld in disgrace, but he lived. He spent the rest of his long life advocating for peaceful contact with other species, a position that earned him mockery from traditionalists but growing respect from younger generations. He never admitted it publicly, but he was grateful for the mercy humans had shown him. It had given him a chance to become something better than what he had been. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had caused that change, not through conquest or cruelty, but through a simple demonstration of strength combined with an offer of friendship. They had proven that they could not be intimidated or threatened into submission, and they had shown that victory did not require becoming as brutal as the enemy. It was a lesson the galaxy would not forget.